Check. You can hear me? Where's the monitor?
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome. How many of you have never been to the Olympic before? Welcome. It is great to have you. I will say the last time Hareesh was here, how many of you were here for this? We chanted to Kali and then the building caught on fire. So maybe we just won't do that again. That the building is only caught on fire to this day that one time. So
Probably coincidence.
needless to say, it was a very powerful day. So for those of you who were there, we're glad to have you back. For those of you who are here the first time, there's only one rule: don't set the building on fire. But turns out, even if you do, we'll invite you back, so it's okay. I'm Katie, and I want to briefly just introduce myself, and then Faiza and Viveka, could you stand up? Oh, Faiza's still out at the door. So this is Viveka, and Viveka, me, and Faiza, who's right there. That is your Alembic team for the day. So if you have questions about Alembic, ranging from can I have tea in this room, all the way up to like, what is this place and what do you do here? You can talk to any of the three of us about that. The answer to the tea question is you can have your tea, but you cannot spill your tea. In every sense of the word, we practice right speech in here. For those of you who haven't been here before, bathrooms are down that hall to the right, and you can go anytime you want. This is not public school. You don't have to ask. We will go for a little while, and then we'll take probably a short break, and then we'll go for a while longer. But if you need to get up and stretch, or, you're a human being first, so please, take care of yourself. Okay. Oh, one final thing is we are live streaming this. So you are here with all these wonderful beings in this room. And we are also with all of the wonderful beings on the internet, which is on the ceiling. So if we do some Q&A, the internet cannot see you. No one knows you're a dog. The people on the internet cannot see you. You'll notice the camera is aimed at the stage, so they can only see the people on the stage. And they also can't hear you. They can only hear sounds that go through the microphone. So if we do any Q&A, we're passing the mic around, and you have a question, please, ask your question, but maybe don't say your home address or your social security number. Okay. If you do, in all seriousness, if you do have a question that you want to stay just in the room, it's very simple. Just don't say it into a microphone. The internet won't hear it. Okay. Does anyone have questions for me about sort of Alembic logistics or anything related to that? Okay, great. Well, please join me then. I will say, just personally, I've benefited very, very much from Hareesh's books and teaching, and I am very glad to have him with us today. And please join me in welcoming him. Welcome.
Yes.
Test. Welcome, everyone. And I'd like to introduce my friend Karnamrita Dasi. And she is a wonderful singer who's been singing Indian devotional music for decades. Yeah. Since you're a teenager, huh?
Since I was born.
Since you're born.
I was born in an ashram.
Yeah. So we're going to begin in this devotional mood, and Karnamrita will sing, and you can just immerse yourself in the vibrations of the devotional singing. And then I'll read a little bit from a sacred scripture, and then she'll sing a little bit more, and we'll go from there. Okay? So once again, welcome everyone, and thank you all for being here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here, and as you can see, I'm not using a microphone, so it's an opportunity for us to enter into what we call in Sanskrit Shravanam, which is the first process of many stages in Bhakti Yoga. It means to deeply listen. And this song is, you'll hear the word Madhuram in this song. The song is known as Madhurastakam. And the word Madhu means sweet. had a beloved teacher by the name of Shamdas. We always sang this together in Gokul and in Govardhan, in the land of Braj in India. And the conversation of the song is, his eyes are sweet, his lips are sweet. The way in which his gait and his hips move when he walks is sweet. And the only thing that this describes in the song is the sweetness of everything about the beloved. And so Shamdas used to say, everything is sweet, and if you see it any differently, then change your perspective. So this is Madhurastical. Maybe we can chant 3 ohms together just to begin your vibration. Take a nice breath. And on the 3rd ohm, make sure that the end of the ohm, you close your lips just softly on the end. And notice how it resonates through the ears, and it opens the jaw, and it releases any tension from the mind through the mouth. Just softly keep your lips touched together for the M at the end of ohm. Deep breath. Adharam madhuram, madhanam madhuram, nayanam madhuram, hasitam madhuram. Hridayam madhuram, gamanam madhuram, madhuradipate, akhilam madhuram. Vakshanam madhuram, charitam madhuram, vasanam madhuram, valitam madhuram, chalitam madhuram, Ramitam madhuram, madhuradipate, akhilam madhuram. Venur madhuro, renur madhuro, Panir madhuro, Pado madhuram, Nityam madhuram, Sakyam madhuram, madhuradipate, akhilam madhuram. Madhuradipate Akilam Madhuram Madhuradipate Akilam Madhuradipate Akilam Gita Madhura Pitam Madhuram Uttam Madhuram Suktam Madhuram Rupam Madhuram Tilakam Madhuram Madhuradipate Akilam Madhuram.
The one who ordains and orders all things, when entreated with an impulse of pure desire, causes the inner moon and sun to rise, and bestows those goals residing in the heart of an embodied being who is awake. In the same way, even while dreaming, that one residing in the center always clearly reveals all desired things and goals, because that one never disregards any loving entreaty. Even a frail person who seizes hold of the inner strength that lies within us all can do whatever needs to be done. Depression is like a thief in the body. Its source is lack of awareness of one's essence nature. If it is eliminated by the unfolding of that, how could it return once its cause is no more? When one abides, meeting everything with openness, then, well, what is the use of talking much? One must experience that oneself. Perceiving the whole field with wisdom, that one remains ever awake, always directing everything to the one, depositing everything in the one, attributing everything to the one. You are never oppressed by another. When you are firmly rooted in the one, then you become capable of bringing about at will the arising and dissolving of your own experience. And you attain the state of being the universal experiencer, the sovereign of the circle, the mandala of your own existence.
Karanam Madhuram Taranam Madhuram Haranam Vamitam Maduram Samitam Maduram Madhuradipate Akilam Maduram Gunja Madura Mala Madura Yamuna Madura Vichi Madura Shalilam Maduram Kamalam Maduram Madhuradipate Akilam Madhuram Gopi Madhura Leela Madhura Yuktam Madhuram Bhuktam Madhuram Drishtam Madhuram Shishtam Madhuram Madhuradipate Akilam Madhuradipate Akilam Madhuram Gopa Madhura Gavo Madhura Yashtir Madhura Shishtir Madhura Dalitam Madhuram Falitam Madhuram Madhuradipate Akilam Madhuradipate Akilam Madhuram Madhuradipate Akilam Madhuram
You can try singing with me if you know the mantra. just listen. Namah Shivaya. All together. One more, just listening. All together. Letting the breath be a little bit deeper than normal, a little longer, a little slower, and a little deeper. Let the jaw relax. Let all the muscles of the face relax. Let the whole body melt as much as possible without actually slumping over. So it's an internal melting. And then bring your attention to the base of the heart. Feeling into the heart region in the middle of the chest. Intuitively find a point near the bottom of that region, and perhaps slightly towards the back of the base of the heart. Also known as the innermost cave of the heart. And in the depths of that secret, sacred place, there shines a tiny, brilliant point of light, like a blue star, sparkling, You don't need to visualize it. More like feel it. Feel as if there's a tiny point of sparkling light in the innermost depths of the heart. Now imagine, if you will, that the rays of this tiny sparkling point of light are the sensations of the body. The sounds of the environment. Imagine that the whole field of experience is actually being generated from this singularity, this sparkling point of ultimacy, this bindu. All the sensations that constitute the body are its rays. The sounds, all of the sounds, are its rays. Thoughts are also its rays. Feelings, emotions, memories. So you're simply immersed in what is. But all that is emanating from this point. Meditative. And perhaps when you open your eyes, you'll be able to glimpse, at least for a moment, that all the colors, all the visual appearances are also the emanations of this singularity, which is the still point at the center of the turning world. Gently open your eyes and see the visual field as yet another emanation of your own sacred center. Om. Special thank you to Karnamrita Dasi, who's on Spotify and all the music places. And this is Ege. If you don't know him, he does ecstatic dance here. Ege-san. He's also on Spotify. Thank you. He sometimes plays for Janet Stone yoga classes and around the Bay Area. Grace Cathedral, you can find him there. One of the best improvisational musicians I know in the world. Yeah. So yeah, this bindu, deep inside, it's emanating all this. We each have our own bindu, but it's actually all the same bindu. All these points are entangled, to use the language of quantum physics. So this experiment was done in 1982 by Elaine Aspect and others that won the Nobel Prize 2 years ago, finally. It had to be replicated over and over and over and over again before they decided to give it the Nobel Prize, because the finding was too astonishingly weird. So when an atom decays and emits two photons, two quanta of light in two different directions, those photons are linked somehow. They are correlated, right? So they maintain always the exact same angle of refraction, no matter how far they go. They can travel millions and millions of miles apart, and they'll just always maintain the exact same angle of refraction, as if they're in communication. And so the experiment was to test, could they be communicating? And the experiment was, okay, so the deuterium or whatever atom it is decays and emits two photons. They speed off at the speed of light, obviously, because they are light. And then the whole point was the computer had to measure their angle of rotation. I said refraction before, but I think it's rotation, yeah. Thank you, Hema. The computer had to measure their angle of rotation fast enough to verify that that they couldn't be communicating somehow at light speed. There was no knowledge about what mechanism they could possibly use to communicate, because photons of light don't communicate. But if there was some mysterious way they could only communicate at light speed, you can only transmit data maximum at light speed, right? But the computer finally in 1982 was able to make the measurement fast enough that it took less time than it would have taken for light to travel between the two photons, right? And so they showed, oh, they're maintaining exactly the same angle of rotation instantaneously. So they can't be communicating to each other. So how are they remaining in perfect sync? Even if they go millions and even billions of miles apart, they maintain in perfect sync. And this is where the idea of entanglement was born. So as astonishing as it may seem, the theory is that these two photons are not two photons. They're actually one. That in our four-dimensional space, they look like two, but at some deeper level of reality, they're actually one. And the physicist David Bohm came up with a nice metaphor to talk about this. He said, imagine you've never seen a fish, okay? And there's this fish in an aquarium, and it's a very skinny fish. But you don't see the fish, you don't see the aquarium. You are just seeing the output of cameras trained on the fish. And you've got one camera trained here and one camera trained there. Then you would see a skinny little object and a fat one, but they're perfectly synchronized. When one moves this way, the other moves that way, exactly in perfect sync. You're seeing the outputs of two cameras. Sorry if I wasn't clear enough. You're seeing two TV screens. You can't see the aquarium, you can't see the fish. You're just seeing two TV screens, which are the outputs of two cameras trained on the fish at different angles. And you'd be studying them. How are they communicating? They're so perfectly synced. But it's actually one, and you just can't see that level of reality where it's one. So Tantric Shaivism had, an idea something like this 1,000 years ago, that the world of your experience is emanated by the bindu, the singularity at the center of your being, and that singularity is entangled with all the other singularities, right? So at a deeper level, there's only one. There's not many, but there appear to be many. And that's why they can be so well synced. Like, look, here we are, all co-creating this reality. All sentient beings are emanating a universe of experience. And those universes of experience heavily overlap. They don't completely overlap. They don't perfectly overlap. You have private experience that you don't share with anyone else, like your inner monologue or your dreams at night, But much of your experience is shared, right? And that's because these broadcasting points, the bindus, which are really one bindu, right? There's an overlap. That is to say, there's a co-creation, right? Just like you can have multiple projectors synced in such a way as to make a single image. So this tradition posited that there is no universe to be found anywhere other than that universe of experience emanated by sentient beings. Meaning to say, there's not a bit of the universe which exists without being emanated by a sentient being, right? That the entire universe that we perceive is moment to moment being created and recreated every moment by the combined emanations of all these bindus. Every sentient being has this bindu point, right? So when you try to put it into words, it kind of sounds fantastical or, I don't know, science fiction-y or something. But that's because the mind is making a picture out of it, right? So when you have the direct experience of it, it's incredibly simple, right? It's not like the kind of abstraction that the mind makes when it hears the theory explained. It's not like that. The direct experience of it is very, very simple and undeniable. You simply feel that all you perceive is emanating from what you are, not from what you thought you were, a person, a person named so and so. No, that's actually part of the emanation. The appearance of a person named so and so is part of the emanation. What you are is emanating the totality of experience. And if you're having this direct experience, it's possible to look in the eyes of another being and see, oh, wow, they're emanating too. And then our emanations are meeting and merging. Of course, we have slightly different experiences, or maybe sometimes very different experiences of the room or the talk or whatever, But still, all these emanations are influencing each other, right? Sort of like interference patterns, right? Which is the technical term for if you drop two stones in an otherwise flat, motionless pond or pool of water. If you drop two stones, right, they emanate waves, concentric waves moving out like that, right, from each point. And when the concentric waves from each stone meet each other, that's called an interference pattern. And it looks really, really beautiful and interesting and complex, even when there's just two stones. And here we have a lot more than two. In this universe, we have countless billions or trillions, we don't know. So I'll come back to this a little later, and you'll see how it ties in with the rest of what you'll learn. So I'll be sharing a little bit from a couple of authors, a couple of sages, masters, siddhas of Tantric Shaivism, both of whom lived in Kashmir. Almost all, not all, but almost all of the most famous authors of Tantric Shaivism happened to be from Kashmir, and there's various reasons for that. And that's why the tradition erroneously became known in the early 20th century, became known as Kashmir Shaivism. So this is simply a mistaken term because the tradition was always pan-Indian. It always covered the entire Indian subcontinent and beyond. Tantric Shaivism was found not only everywhere in the subcontinent of India, but also in Southeast Asia, as far as Indonesia, as far as Bali. So Tantric Shaivism was widespread in the Asian world. And it just so happens, again, that the most prominent and respected authors of the tradition came from Kashmir. And so that's how that misnomer got created, right? And so a lot of people still use the term Kashmir Shaivism. And it's I don't want to say don't do that, but it does have the effect of implying that this was a parochial tradition. This is just something happening in Kashmir, right? When actually it ended up influencing all of Asian spirituality, right? So directly in South and Southeast Asia and indirectly in East Asia, because Tantric Shaivism influenced the development of Tantric Buddhism, which then found its way to China, Korea, and Japan as well, and influenced those cultures. So the impact of classical Tantra, Tantric Shaivism in particular, on the whole Asian world was quite huge. Now, Kashmir is indeed a very special place. 1,000 years ago, many inhabitants of the valley were practitioners of Tantra. A higher percentage than in most other places, let's put it that way. It was never the majority, okay? This was never like a popular movement because the tantric practice, tantric yoga, required quite a considerable commitment. So usually it would be a practice commitment of about 90 minutes a day. And a lot of people are either not sufficiently motivated or just don't have the time, for that kind of thing, or they don't make the time, right? It was never the majority who were practicing this tradition, but it had a disproportionate influence in terms of aesthetics, in terms of art and poetry and so on, and also in terms of spirituality. But Kashmir was one place where there was a higher percentage of tantric practitioners than most other places, probably second only to the ancient kingdom of Udayana, which is now in the Swat Valley, or which now is the Swat Valley of northwest Pakistan. And of course, that area is all Muslim today, as is Kashmir. But back in the day, 1,000 years ago, it was said, who knows if it's actually true, but it was said that all the residents of the small kingdom of Udayana were tantric practitioners. And this is the place from which the fabled yoginis came, the enlightened female practitioners whose influence ended up being felt throughout the entire tradition. Those enlightened female adepts called the yoginis, where here the word yogini doesn't mean a female practitioner of yoga. The word yogini means an awakened adept who happens to be female. So the yoginis of Udayana were hugely influential, and Kashmir and Udayana are relatively close together. They were influencing each other. Anyway, so 1,000 years ago, Kashmir was a very, very flourishing and open and tolerant, culturally tolerant and inclusive place, sort of like the San Francisco Bay Area, except more so, probably more, like people don't imagine, there could be any point in history with more tolerance than we have now. Well, since the election, I suppose you don't think that. But anyway, yes, in fact, Kashmir was incredibly tolerant, culturally, politically, and religiously, and indeed, perhaps even more than what we experience. And the example that's sometimes given, and always makes for a fun story, is in the 900s, in the 10th century, there were all these different tantric sects flourishing in the Valley of Kashmir, but one of them went just a little bit too far, and they were out. There was only one sect that was outlawed in that time, and that was the Black Blankets. Okay, so the Black Blankets, I won't tell the whole story, but their vow is you get initiated as a couple. Right? So a couple will present themselves for initiation in the Black Blanket sect, and their vow was they would receive a big black blanket, hence the name of the sect, with 2 holes cut in the blanket, and they would stick their 2 heads through the 2 holes, and the couple would go about everywhere under the same single blanket. Okay, so that was part of the vow, but we haven't got to the good bit. The good bit is they had to swear, they had to take a vow, a vrata, that they would make love whenever the fancy took them, wherever they happened to be. Under their black blanket, of course. Very modest. But if they're in the marketplace, if they're in the town square and they felt the urge, they had to, according to their vow, plop down there in the middle of the square and go at it under their black blanket. They were covered, but obviously people knew what was happening there. So the king said, that's just a little bit too far. That is a little bit too far. So they were outlawed, the Nilambaras. So that just gives you a sense, though. But it was happening for a while before they were outlawed. Okay, so that doesn't even happen here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, maybe on Pride, but on no other time. Or Folsom. Yeah, of course. Okay, so point is, this was a very vibrant and diverse religious culture. And so, from the point of view of valuing diversity, it was a tragedy when it was finally conquered by Muslim rulers in 1300s, early 1300s. And little by little, the traditions that had flourished were periodically persecuted and attenuated, and so on and so forth. And it was a very long process from like 1300 all the way up till 1992, when the last exodus of Kashmiri Shaiva families left the valley. So a process that began actually more than 800 years ago, or about 800 years ago, only finished recently in our lifetimes, right? So the valley only became completely Muslim in 1992. Completely meaning barring a handful of families, 4 or 5 families that are left there. And so Shaivism is still hanging on by a thread in the valley of Kashmir. A few families left who are practitioners, and at least one awakened teacher, a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful being of great, great love, called Prannathji, who I've been very blessed to sit with a couple of times. So he's like the last living representative of the tradition there in the valley of Kashmir. I mean, there are other practitioners besides him, but he's an awakened being who just emanates unconditional loving presence from every pore of his body. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see him. And I've only sat with him a couple times, but both times, like I gave him a hug, and immediately tears sprang to his eyes. And he says, "You are teaching Shaivism. That was the wish of my guru, that Shaivism should continue and not die out." And he's just so moved that there are people like me out there teaching the tradition, that even as it dies out in Kashmir, it's everywhere else. So going back once again to the 10th century, or actually a little earlier, the 9th century, there was a great master named Vasugupta. And Vasugupta famously revealed the Shiva Sutras. Vasugupta, we know, loved to wander the hills and valleys above the city of Srinagar. And so up there's beautiful mountains, small mountains. Further, there's big mountains as well, right? This is where the Himalaya mountain chain ends, is right there to the east of the valley of Kashmir. And so Vasugupta would wander the hills and valleys just above the Srinagar, the city which is still there today and is much bigger now. And he would sit with siddhas and yoginis, awakened male and female masters, and receive their transmission. And so he was a collector and a compiler, among other things, of these orally transmitted wisdom traditions from these siddhas and yoginis who weren't writing anything down, right? So he was collecting some of that wisdom. Some of that wisdom also made it into the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, which is almost certainly not by a single author. Well, a single author put the frame story, put the verses at the beginning and end, but the teachings in there come from a diverse array of sources of the oral tradition originally. And we know that because one of the Kashmiri Krama gurus tells us so, that he characterizes the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra as deriving from oral transmission of the siddhas and yoginis, specifically there above the valley of Kashmir. So Vasugupta, his student, his disciple, and his successor was someone named Kalata. And Kalakta composed the spandakarikas, the stanzas on pulsation. And in the modern period, Vasugupta is more famous. More people have heard of his name today than Kalakta. But back in the day, Kalakta was even more highly regarded than Vasugupta. So, in fact, when the Kashmiri historian Kalhana happens to mention in passing the appearance of many great beings and saints in the valley of Kashmir in the mid-9th century, he mentions Kalakta by name. And he doesn't mention Vasugupta. He doesn't mention anyone else, possibly. I think he just says Kalakta and others. And that mention is notable because that historian to which I refer, he was completely uninterested in spirituality. He was a political historian. So in the course of his political history, he mentions, these saints, these great saints appeared who were much venerated. And he said, I would tell their stories, but it would take too much room in the book. So he had all sorts of biographical details about them, which are now lost forever because he wasn't sufficiently interested. Oh, well. So Kalakta wrote the Spandakarikas. Many people today think that Vasugupta wrote the Spandakarikas, but that's not in fact correct. So that's another reason that Kalakta is not as well known. So I'll be now reading some of his verses. So this text, the Spandakarikas, it's 51 karikas. A karika is a stanza. 51 stanzas on pulsation, spanda, where spanda also means like oscillation between expansion and contraction, between opening and closing, between any two pairs of opposites. So part of the teaching is that these apparent opposites are in fact always on a spectrum, that they're two ends of a spectrum, that we move between expansion and contraction, right? And that movement is a divine pulsation, that the goal is not, according to non-dual Tantric Shaivism, the goal is not to try to stay expanded all the time, which turns out to be impossible, but to learn to ride the waves of the cycle of expansion and contraction in such a way that the entire cycle is revealed as an expression of the beauty of non-dual consciousness, the divine consciousness. And I'll mention, by the way, just briefly, that this efflorescence of saints and sages and siddhas that took place in the mid-800s, the mid-9th century, was an efflorescence of saints teaching non-duality, which is actually significant because Westerners think that India is, the land of non-dual teachings par excellence, and it is, but that doesn't mean that non-duality was ever more popular as a doctrine than many others. Okay, so the non-dual teachings that became famous in the West through figures like Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, and through scriptures like the Upanishads, all those non-dual teachings caught the imagination or the interest of Western minds, right? So people didn't realize, actually, Indian teachings of other stripes far outnumber non-dual teachings. So duality and that which we don't have a name for in English and gets translated duality cum non-duality, which is a very clunky phrase for bheda bheda. Bheda bheda means a teaching on unity and diversity that there's just no easy way to summarize it. But it's the teaching, for example, found in the Bhagavad Gita, where you see the teaching that Krishna is in all things. He's in all beings, but he isn't all things. Do you see what I mean? In other words, the teaching that God is the best, brightest part of everything, right? The best, brightest bit of everything, the essence, the sap in the tree, like Krishna says in the Gita, among mantras I am Om, among Vedas I am the Rig Veda, I am the sap in every tree, I am so he's giving like among storm gods I am Rudra, so the best quintessential example of each class, right? And he says, I am in all things, but they are not in me. In other words, the divine spark is in you, but that doesn't mean all of you is divine, right? And this is, of course, is the normal, very much the normal doctrine that you find in many traditions, as well as, for example, Gnostic Christianity of almost 2,000 years ago. The divine spark is in all beings, but you also have a bad part, whether you call it your mind, your ego, your body, whatever the bad part is, right? And so you need to help the good part triumph. As Krishna says in the Gita, let one lift himself up by the self and not degrade himself. So anyway, there's that teaching that is the dominant teaching in Indian religious history. The idea that the divine is in everything, but does not constitute the whole of everything. Okay? Whereas the non-dualist view is much more rare, which is understandable because it sounds batshit crazy. Everything is God. Everything. Yes, even your shit. So yeah, that view was there came along philosophers who would defend the non-dual view philosophically in argumentation. But the view actually emerged from a particular kind of mystical experience that not everyone has. This experience that absolutely everything is an expression of an underlying principle that we could call God, or the divine, or consciousness, or if you're Buddhist, you call it Buddha nature, right? But that everything is somehow a perfect expression of the divine, right? Whether it's gold or a lump of shit, each perfectly expresses the capacity of consciousness or God to appear in that way. And everything that exists is not only equally God, right? So that's the tough nut to swallow, right? Because bad people are equally God. Yeah. Everything is an expression of the one, and everything is in balance, even though we might not see it. Right? If we pay attention to the news, we learn about all the suffering in the world. But nobody could begin to reckon the countless moments of joy that happen all over the world every single day. Every single day. They're not in the news, maybe one millionth of the joyful things that happen make it into the news, right? So there's this balance, there's the symmetry, there's the notion in this tradition and some others that everything actually perfectly cancels out. If you were to add everything up, the so-called positive and the so-called negative, you get a perfect zero, right? Which is also, by the way, a theory in physics, right? That if you add up all the forces in the universe, right? Because gravity, for example, is a negative force, and if you add up all the forces in the universe, that they would perfectly cancel out to zero. Okay, so that's one theory in physics, not provable at least yet, because we don't know what dark matter is or dark energy. Anyway, point is, so this non-dual teaching, to which we can return, but I was just sketching it out a little bit, right? This non-dual teaching, by the way, cannot be understood intellectually. It has to be direct experience. In fact, many masters in the tradition say, if you try to act as if it's true on the basis of a mental understanding, that's potentially bad for you and everyone, right? Because a mental, or intellectual grasp of the teaching might tend to lead you astray in various ways. Okay, so the direct experience is again quite different from that. It's not the experience that everything's equally good. Okay, everything is God doesn't mean everything is equally praiseworthy, at least from a human point of view, right? From a divine point of view, yes, you can praise death, right? You can praise suffering, right? But from a human point of view, we all agree some things merit our approval more than others. And that distinction is never argued against by the tradition. That's not the point of non-duality. But anyway, point is that Kshemarajya and other authors write that it's in this time in the mid-9th century that, to put it mythologically, as Kshemarajya does, Lord Shiva caused there to be born saints and sages who realized the non-dual nature of reality and thereby saved the non-dual tradition from oblivion, for it had been waning for many, many centuries. And that's actually true. The non-dual teachings you see in the Upanishads were not popularly known or quoted or studied by this time many centuries later. So then there's this new efflorescence of non-dual teachings in Tantric Shaivism. And they come in a different form because in the non-duality that got extracted from the Upanishads, diversity is an illusion. It's not real. There isn't really diversity. Everything is one, so everything is the same. Whereas in Tantric non-duality, very important difference, in Tantric non-duality, they say, no, diversity is real. The one really does become all these different flavors of experience, all these different flavors of human. So Tantra ended up being a tradition that embraces diversity, whereas Vedanta and other non-dual traditions that said diversity is an illusion, they didn't have the same motivation within their tradition, within their doctrine, to embrace diversity. Okay, so having said that, coming to Kalata, who again is one of these saints mentioned by the non-spiritual historian guy, right, in his political history of Kashmir, and also mentioned by Kshemarajya as one of the masters who realized non-duality and thereby helped save the non-dual tradition from oblivion. So Kalata's text, the Spandakarika, is translated in full on my blog site, hareesh.org. Where'd it go? Here it is. And that includes not only the verses, but Kalata's explanation of his own verses. So I translated that as well. And I read from it earlier in the middle bit of Karnamrita's wonderful singing. That was nice. When people know their stuff, it can come together like that, because we had no rehearsal. We had no prep, no rehearsal, not Karnamrita, not Ege, not me. That was just on the fly. So, there's some benefit to studying the same thing for decades. Can we open this door again and get a cool breeze? All right, she's got it. Oh, the heater was on?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. That's why I'm sweating. Any questions on what I've said so far before I go to the text? Any questions? Yes. Hello, Turtle Woman.
All sentient beings share one bindu. What beings are sentient?
Whichever ones are.
Not fair.
Yeah, we the tradition doesn't try to adjudicate that, right? But sentient beings here means, yeah, sorry, I should have explained that part, that a conscious creature who has the ability to reflect on its experience. Okay, so some people use the term sentient to mean any conscious creature. And here I'm using it to mean, as because some of my teachers, I've been told that this is the wrong use of the word sentient, that it should just mean any conscious creature. But I got it from one or more of my teachers that sentient here means a conscious creature with the ability to reflect on themselves. So
That sounds like humans.
maybe dolphins, maybe aliens, maybe whales. Who knows? No, so it's not, the tradition wants to avoid arguments about that. So we won't get into one.
Got it.
But which is not to say, by the way, that conscious creatures who don't self-reflect, they are conscious, meaning to say they're not, this is not a view in which those other conscious creatures that don't self-reflect are in fact just part of the matrix. They don't have experience of their own. That's not the view here. They all do. Every conscious creature, down to some small little mouse or whatever, has its own experience, has its own conscious experience, right? But if they have no power of self-reflection, no vimarsha, then they aren't part of the co-creative web. That is to say, the process of co-creation, which is modifying this whole universe moment to moment, right? If there's no capacity for self-reflection, then you're not part of the co-creative process, but you are having an experience as a mousy experience, and animals which don't self-reflect, of course, they also can't modify their own experience, right? They're just having the experience they do. They don't contemplate and say, it's been like this up till now, but what other possibilities are there? Could I, even as a mouse, have a non-mousy experience? So they're not, do you see what I mean? They're not modifying their own experience. So it's not an insult to them to say that they're not part of the co-creative web in the same way.
But they're maintaining the stability like bees.
Of course, no, everything.
So we're all blessed, everything.
Of course, everything is maintaining the stability. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was going to bring up the example of streams, which are also dimensions of awareness.
Streams like rivers.
Rivers.
Yeah, rivers have spirits. Rivers have spirits. Yeah. Everything is consciousness and everything has spirit, whether or not it has an emanating bindu. And there's no interest in the tradition in kind of debating about that, right? And this teaching is a fairly esoteric teaching within the tradition. But anyway, the tree, the stream, everything has its spirit, right? You may or may not be part of the co-creative process. If that spirit has the power of self-reflection, then it is. Yeah.
Know what I find hard to reconcile in my mind? As you say, non-duality is everything is part of one, light and dark, gold and shit.
Mm-hmm.
Then it seems to contradict the notions that God is love.
Yeah. Except there you're superimposing a Western notion of God onto this tradition. This tradition does sort of teach that God is love, in the sense that God, or being, existence, consciousness, loves destruction as much as creation, loves death as much as life. loves the capacity to suffer just as much as the capacity to experience joy. Okay? Now, but it's a non-dual tradition, so there's no deity on top of a hierarchy loving from a separate position, right? But beingness itself is love in the sense that it does not inhibit or disallow any possibility that exists within itself, right? So all these possibilities, suffering and joy, life and death, exist within being, capital B, being, which you could also call the trans-individual divine consciousness or the ground of being, different things, right? But just being is fine. So it, as it were, refuses to, this is metaphorical language because the process of the unfolding of being doesn't happen with forethought. Being doesn't have a mind. The universe doesn't have a mind that thinks about how should it go and makes a decision, right? But it's as if being refuses to negate any aspect of itself, right? Refuses to disallow any aspect of its own being, because that would be an act of self-hatred, to disallow an aspect of its being. So it is understood that it is a function of what we might call love, that everything exists. Okay, so that's why I came up with this phrase, which has become quite popular in some circles. In Tantra Illuminated, I have this phrase, "For God so loved the world that she became it." Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And now it's cold again.
Question.
Jeff?
One thing I have read in the American Indian, Native American traditions also, that the indigenous belief was that man was a determiner in the midst of the ongoing flow of reality in a way that the other animals were not.
Oh, this idea is found in many, many cultures, for sure. It's just modern people, it rubs them the wrong way because it's just too anthropocentric, And I understand that because it's anthropocentric views that have led to the current decimation of species, of biodiversity, in part. But there is a difference between the ability to self-reflect and the lack of that ability, and of course it also gives rise to horrific as well as wondrous possibilities for behavior. But let's not stay on that point.
Right. So my question was, I was a little bit confused when you said that non-dual philosophy was found in various parts all over Asia. But
no, the Tantric tradition was
okay.
sometimes accompanied by non-dual philosophy, but Tantra
Okay.
in and of itself is not always non-dual. It depends who's teaching it. It depends what
Okay,
lineage.
So my question was this a spontaneous arising across a broad geographic area, or did it actually travel from an origination point to all of these other places?
It seems to have traveled originally from the Himalayas, the Himalaya region stretching from Kashmir to Bengal, from there to everywhere else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But let's stay away from historical and academic questions, just because time is so limited, and some of you have spiritual questions as well.
Thank you for sharing these teachings with us and for your work. This is not a very deep question, but it's a personal question. I've been doing a lot of work to get in touch with my own emanation and to find resilience and strength in that practice. But there is another emanation in my life that is causing me a lot of harm. And I find myself struggling with a lot of resentment, and it feels like something that's toxic inside of me. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for how we can find peace when there are other folks around us who are causing us harm or who are not seeing us clearly?
Well, that's a big question.
Okay.
Yeah, so the teachings I'm going to come to here are going to touch on that, but let's see if something wants to arise right now in response to that. So the tradition, and you might not like this per se, but the tradition invites us to realize that there is no other. There is no otherness except the otherness we create with our mind. And so there isn't another emanation. There's just that which is emanating from what you are, which is the entire world of your experience. So this is a tough nut teaching, though, and we need to kind of nuance it quite a bit, which I'll do here in a little bit, I hope. But how can I summarize it more simply? The invitation is to see everything happening in your life as a gift. So if there's difficulty, that's the gift. What opportunity does that difficulty give rise to for you? What possible growth is forced by that difficulty, right? What possible insight is brought about by that difficulty, that challenge, okay? Now, this, hearing this teaching kind of makes people imagine that Tantra is like a sort of pacifist tradition. You just let everything be, and if it's difficult, you do your inner work, No, this is a tradition that says, take whatever action you can. And this is not even a nonviolent tradition. There are nonviolent traditions in India that you all know of, like that represented by Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Ahimsa, Buddhism, and so on. Tantra per se is not a nonviolent tradition. It says, hey, if you got to cut the person's head off, cut their head off. Literally or figuratively, right? So, and the example that's been given by my teachers is like, oh, if there's an unrepentant pedophile, who not only wouldn't stop but doesn't want to stop molesting kids, you kill him. What else are you going to do? Let 100 kids be harmed? That's the perspective in the tradition, and some modern people find it shocking and others don't. But in other words, I give an extreme example to make the point. And by the way, the tradition says you don't do it out of hatred. If you got to kill someone, kill them out of love. Cut their head off with the same love with which you bow to the feet of your teacher. That's the ideal, right? But anyway, the whole point of making that dramatic example is to show that this is very much not a passive tradition. It's a tradition that says take action when you can. But don't imagine for a moment that anything has been thrust upon you, that anything has been forced upon you. Do you know what I mean? Like whatever difficulty, this is unfair, this is life just sucks, or it's been, I didn't ask for this, I don't deserve this. That's not the perspective we take in this tradition. We take the perspective everything is a gift, and there's no such thing as a victim from the first person perspective. This is a first person teaching. Okay? So that distinction is incredibly important. So I'll just explain for a moment. It's not a third person teaching, it's a first person teaching. So what that means is the tradition doesn't say that it's wrong to call someone else a victim. In fact, we need to do that for legal reasons. We need to say that person is a victim of this violence or harm or whatever, right? But the tradition says nobody is a victim from the first person, from your own perspective. If you see yourself as a victim, then you are bypassing the incredibly important learning and growth that could come if you actually open to the possibility that what you are manifested this experience, and in that manifestation includes, every manifestation includes in it intrinsically blessing energy, the power to confer blessings. Okay? So I have to stress that because, especially these days, if say, oh, the tradition says there's no such thing as a victim, people are like, oh, are you saying, oh, whoever, this girl who was raped or whatever, she's not a victim? No, she is a victim, right? But when she begins her awakening journey, she will learn the value to disavowing that label for herself, right? Okay, so having said that, we'll circle back to it as well, I hope. But do you have a follow-up question, or is that enough for now?
I think I think I need to let it marinate a little bit what you just said, but thank you. Yeah. I feel I appreciate your words. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you mentioned something earlier when you said, God so loved the world that she became it. And that felt very luminous, very meaningful for me. And perhaps there was a certain allusion to the manifestation of Shakti as the appearance of the world.
Yeah.
And I've been wanting to really delve deep into the Swatantra Shakti aspect, the innate freedom of this power that is inherent in nature, in the self, in the nature of the self.
Yes.
And specifically, I think from kind of, if you could help clarify how it is similar and distinct from this idea of free will, which kind of gets thrown around quite a bit. The idea of free will, because I feel that somewhere in its root, there's a distinction there which is not being made.
Yeah, very important. Yeah. There's undoubtedly some people in the audience who are like, uh-oh, when you ask that, because this can be a can of worms that I have gone into. But this today will not be that can of worms, because there's a very simple way to say this. There's a beautifully simple way. And the non-dual teacher, Mike Snyder, well, he was a teacher for a short time. He's no longer a public figure, and withdrew his materials and went and disappeared into the back country. But he's an amazing man, amazing teacher. And he said this so beautifully. And I heard this and I was like, you know what? Nothing more need be said. He said, the person that you think you are, a person named so-and-so with this life history, this bio, right? That person does not have any free will. How could they? Because they're literally a product of their environment. And every choice that limited self makes, that body-mind makes, is dictated by genes and environmental influences and a little bit of randomness. And nowhere in there is there room for free will. But Mike Snyder said, what you truly are is nothing but free will. So the swatantra, right? There's two forms of the word swatantra, independent and free, and swatantriya, independence, freedom, autonomy, right? The swatantriya belongs to essence nature, right? And it's it's doing it all the time. What you are freely manifests the world of experience moment to moment to moment, freely sustains it, freely dissolves it, freely conceals itself, pretends that it's not the creator, sustainer, and dissolver of experience, and freely reveals itself to itself once again. It's all happening totally autonomously, right? And that's why every really important pivotal moment in the spiritual life cannot be predicted. It's so unpredictable. You cannot predict who or when will start an awakening process, and who or when will suddenly pop into non-dual awareness, right? It's happened so many in direct experience. I mean, I have seen in my own community people I never would have guessed that person was going to wake up and stabilize an awakening. Whoa, like, and then someone else you think, oh yeah, of course they're going to get it. No, but then they don't for whatever reason, or maybe they do later. It's just so unbelievably, magically, fascinatingly unpredictable. That is to say, because it's not part of the karmic setup. Okay, all the choices you make in life that lead to consequences, that lead to other choices, that lead to consequences. That's all the karmic setup, right? That's a matrix, literally a matrix of incredibly interconnected, interrelated, and overdetermined causes and conditions. Whereas this possibility of awakening is somehow outside the matrix, right? And yes, by the way, the Wachowski brothers, now sisters, who made the movie, were reading Vedanta and other philosophies. That is actually a background. It's not just a coincidence. So this possibility of awakening is outside the karmic setup, is outside the matrix, and can happen to anyone. And that's something that Abhinavagupta stresses, the great non-dual tantric master, when he says, how absurd that some people say, you have to have good enough karma for this awakening to begin. He says, of course, it has nothing to do with karma. It couldn't. And that is indeed why we see very bad people, people who led very terrible lives, they have spiritual awakenings as much as anyone else, So that's the freedom. There's the freedom there, right? And so if you want to access the aspect of your being where the freedom resides, instead of this game that people play of pretending that the limited self, the person named so-and-so, insert your name here, has free will, right? Defending to their last breath their free will, their free choice. I chose that. The fact that it feels like you chose it is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that you could have chosen differently. And if you can't see that, you need to take a philosophy class. But you can access your deeper being more. How? Laya. The tradition says you need to melt out of your conditioned, limited sense of self, the little me in the big world, and melt into that which you already are. This is called Laya, Laya. And part of the way we do it is relaxing, opening, and listening. And when we're listening, we're feeling into the whole dynamic play of consciousness unfolding, right? We're not using the mind to try to land here and there. There's just too many factors. There's too much going on, right? It's dropping down into the quiet ground of being, melting into it, relaxing so deeply that you relax out of your sense of limited identity and selfhood and into this quiet ground. And then from that perspective, you feel the flow of the pattern, or the weave of the pattern if we're using a tapestry metaphor. You feel it. And then when you're feeling it, when you're feeling how it's weaving and unweaving itself, or how it's flowing, it is always perfectly obvious of how to align yourself with it. You just give yourself into it, and then you become part of the freedom which is being enacted every moment, moment to moment, and giving rise to the whole field of experience. So you discover that what the person you think you are likes this and doesn't like that and wishes things were otherwise. But what you actually are always already loves what is. But what is not a static moment. It's not a static snapshot of reality. It's an ever-fluxing reality, you know? So to love what is to love the flux. It's to love and to experience the freedom that is manifesting as that flux. So in a way, this is the most important question. Yeah. Thank you. I guess we're supposed to have a break. Would it be about now if we did? See, our time is so precious. I just think, and I can see in your faces that you're here. You're captivated. You know what I mean? Because these are only the most important issues in human life. No, it's absolutely true. Through the realization of what we're talking about, all problems are solved. Well, they're not so much solved as dissolved. Right? Because it's not about solving problems on this external level. Oh, I have this problem person. Oh, now spiritual awakening happened and they just went away. No, maybe not. It's that you stop seeing it as a problem. You stop seeing it as a problem. That's why my guru said yoga, meaning the term yoga in the broadest sense, of course, yoga doesn't solve your problems. It dissolves the state in which problems exist. Yeah, in the back there. Here comes a mic. Then the people at home don't get frustrated because I can't hear. I feel your pain, people. But I don't always do anything about it.
Earlier, you talked about all sentient beings sharing the same bindu. I was wondering if you could speak to the other bindus and if they are unique to the human experience. I'm specifically thinking of some teachings I've heard of around the red bindu and red bindu sort of disorder being kind of foundational to a lot of what we see as insanity.
No, well, that's very different from in my lineage. But really quick here, I want to stay out of certain rabbit holes or we won't get to the main teaching. Very quick, the bindu of which I spoke was the Mahabindu, not one of three, not one of two, not, the source of all bindus, the Mahabindu, right? So this is at a deeper level. Okay, so very, very, very quickly, we can just map 4 levels of depth. Physical body, you all know that, easy. Subtle body, the subtle body made of prana and chakras and nadis and the structure of which instantiates the patterns of the psyche. That's the subtle body, right, or energy body, right? So that has chakras, right? One level deeper, the so-called causal body, that has bindus, multiple bindus. Some people say 2, 3, 4, whatever, different lineages, right? My lineage has 3 on the level of the causal body. That's deeper than the subtle body. So bindus are not part of the subtle body, right? They're much deeper than that. And then one level deeper than that, the supracausal body, so-called, is the Mahabindu, the one bindu that emanates as 3, which then emanate a subtle body, which then emanates a physical body. Okay? And in my lineage anyway, Trika lineage, the oral practice component of the Trika lineage, the teaching on the bindus is like red bindu is vitality, it is sexual energy, it is somaticization. I don't know. It is the experience of embodiment. not a source of disorder or anything like that. Okay. Were there any other burning questions before I move on? ECAT here in the front. Where's the mic now? Can we get more light? Whoever knows how the lights work. No. Posh hippies do not tolerate fluorescent lights. ECAT.
Well, first of all, it's just blowing my mind that awakening is outside of karma, because I did not realize that. And I feel like in some places I've heard that the opposite.
They're wrong.
They're wrong. Yes. So that's going to be interesting to sit with and I don't know. Just feel like there's a lot there. But the question was a follow-up to the question about where we were talking about victimhood. And I was just wondering, this is a very practical question. Is there a way to kind of let someone know who you're close to that they're like in victim mentality?
I wouldn't try that.
You just kind of, but it's like, if it's just so annoying to hear their stories all the time, what do you do?
You say, it's so annoying to hear your stories all the time. Tell the truth. You can soften it a little bit. The thing is, what I've seen is that in the interests of, this obsession with ahimsa, in the interest of softening it, people articulate what they're trying to say so softly that the other person doesn't actually get it. It needs to land, right? And you're giving them a chance to, look, if you remain sufficiently annoyed for long enough, you're going to end up distancing yourself from that person, And it's like when I was a teenager, I worked at a grocery store. And one day they called me in the office and said, we have to let you go. You're fired. And I was like, that sucks, because if you had told me what I'm not doing good enough, I would have tried, So in that same sort of spirit, it's like, give them a chance to meet you where you want to be met, and thus deepen the friendship. They deserve that if you like them, if you care about them, So telling them how annoying their stories are is a gift to them. Now we're seeing it from the other perspective, right? It is a gift to them, assuming they value the friendship, right? Because it can't go on indefinitely with this tiresome dynamic, But you have to be very careful if you're getting into any of that, because it so easily is heard as a kind of threat. If you can't shift your thinking on this, I'm gonna punish you by distancing. No, it's just what happens naturally, and by acknowledging it ahead of time, it's like we have a chance to deepen this connection rather than weaken it, right? So, but instead of teaching them about, look, you're making yourself into a victim and you need not do that, you could say the truth of your experience, which is that it grates on you to hear these poor me stories over and over again, right? And part of the reason it grates on you is that you feel, you have faith that they have power within them, that they have the inner power to empower themselves and to not be adopting this perspective all the time, to liberate themselves from this perspective. And part of the reason it's annoying is not just that you don't like hearing poor me stories, but also that it starts to feel like upsetting that they're not doing what deep down they could do, take hold of their inner power, right? Now, of course, you sensing that they have that capability doesn't mean they have that capability now, right? So what we don't want to do is hold this false view that you could break yourself out of this victim story. Why don't you do it? See, that becomes a patronizing view, a denigrating view, right? You might be quite accurately sensing, and indeed everyone has this inner power. So you might sense their capacity to free themselves, but that doesn't mean that capacity is available to them now. So they also shouldn't be denigrated or demonized in any way for not availing themselves of that inner strength, right? So since discussing these things can be so delicate, the safest option is always just to tell the shortest version of the truth you can, right? And it has to unfold organically in the moment, right? Because it's like, I find it can help to prime the person, to prep them. Hey, I want to raise an issue, or I want to raise something, that disturbs me or is upsetting for me, and then they're getting ready, right there, so that it doesn't like take them so by surprise. So this whole dance, this whole human dance, it's so freaking delicate. It's so complex. But please don't imagine that you can avoid harming people you love. You can't. You can't, right? This thing of like, oh, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to hurt their feelings. Then you'll harm them in some other way, right? We can't avoid it. So, in this tradition, as I've taught before in some other contexts, truth is more important than nice. Satya is more important than ahimsa. And that makes a big difference, But do you see where I was going with this thing of how you can spin it to the positive while still being truthful? I find your stories frustrating or annoying or whatever. And I sense that you have the capacity to empower yourself, to free yourself, right? In that way you're praising them, right? And so it helps bring balance to the force in the interaction. Okay, one more before we move on.
The previous question actually inspired like a bit of a burning follow-up question. So maybe in my natural inclination would be to tend towards using these teachings maybe as a way to be like solipsistic. Like, okay, so there's somebody who is annoying or grading me, and that's my lesson, that's my thing to reckon with or deal with, and I'm going to manage it within myself. But what you're saying is that there's there's truth that to be shared. There's an element of maybe will, like, okay, I should do something, not just maintain or like sort it out within myself. And I'm curious, what do the teachings have to say about outward action versus maybe more inward?
Both end. You work both sides of that equation until it meets in the middle. Do what you can externally and work with what's arising internally, and that's the magical thing, that you meet in that center place of understanding, equanimity, insight, and joy by always working both sides of any equation. You know what I mean? Like the example is also given in the tradition of self-effort and grace. If it's all self-effort, you're giving yourself way too much credit, But if it's all grace, then you're abdicating responsibility, right? So self-effort and opening to the power of grace, and there's a beautiful meeting in the middle. So there's a lot of teachings like that, and there's detail and nuance to how the both and works out, right? It's not to say that every time you come up with two propositions, it's always both and, right? Because you might have fabricated two propositions when actually there's three or or one, But when there are two real aspects like this one, of internal work versus external action, then in those cases, it's always both end. Yeah. Okay, so, gosh. Katie had said, "Oh, you can go from 3 to 9 p.m." And I said, no, let's do 3 to 6. And now that I'm here, I realize Katie is wiser than me. Because what happens is I see you guys, it's like, oh, we could get somewhere. We just need more time. Well, no. How late can we go? How much overtime can we go, Katie? None? Some? Okay. Okay, so not much. Okay. Okay, so this is called dance break. Okay, 3-minute dance break, and then sit down again. Ready for it? Here it comes. This is really going to be 3 or 4 minutes. Don't go far unless you need to.
I'm begging.
Let's see you dance. Come on, don't just stand there. I know, yeah, it's dangerous. Yes, I know, yeah. It's a wonderful teaching. Yeah. Okay. That's it. Come back to your seat. I mean, it could open a crack. Yeah. Oh, can we regroup? Can we do this? Oh my gosh. They were supposed to just... I'll give them another minute. See, this is exactly why I don't usually like to do a break. Because then this cue, just go anytime during the session. And then people are like, oh, but I don't want to miss something. But that way the queue's very long. I guess it's a no-win situation. Okay, a couple more questions while we wait for the others. Yes, where's the mic? So let's start here. What's your name?
Mary.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Obviously, so much of this teaching is very confronting. It's
Good.
quite vertiginous, I suppose.
Yes.
And it is kind of reminiscent of the Buddhist tale of the person who really understands emptiness and grabs his collar, because there's this almost homing pigeon desire to go back to corporeality. And I just feel like there's a tension between the comfort zone of what is atomization and selfhood, but then also this seeming forced compulsion towards kenosis, emptying out and receiving the non-dual awakening experience. And even if you're outside of the wisdom tradition, even if you're just secular, the way that we seek oblivion, be it through drinking or any dopaminergic activity of choice, we're still seeking that emptiness. And I'm just wondering, what is that compulsion? Is in your wisdom tradition, is that a force? Is that a coming home, a returning? What is that? Because for even in my friendship group, I often go on retreat and, you know, I'm very honest about what's difficult about it, what's challenging. They're like, why the hell did you go back? So I was just wondering if that kind of moth to the flame in a sense of self-annihilation, if there's terminology, language, truth to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. The black resolving force, it's sometimes called the black resolving force. When personified as a goddess, it's Kali. Yeah. When misunderstood, it becomes a source of suffering. When avoided, right? So it's not, you know, when somebody's trying to obliviate themselves with alcohol or some other drug, that isn't the black resolving force. That's an avoidance, an attempt to avoid the black resolving force, you know? So, for example, everyone or anyone, I shouldn't say everyone, anyone can sense a little bit of the void just every night when falling asleep, you know? And when that's scary, it's like you drink yourself to sleep, so you just you get to miss that glimpse of the void, you know? That's just one of many possible examples. So the interesting thing about humans is that they're caught in between. They neither give themselves to the black resolving force of annihilation, nor do they give themselves fully into embodiment, you know? And this tradition says both are actually already accomplished, but you're not participating fully, right? What does it mean to say both are accomplished? It is to say that the fundamental nature of reality is no thing that manifests as something, no thing appearing as something, right? And that spiritual practice enables us to see and experience the emptiness everywhere as everything, that everything everything is like the emptiness wearing the flimsiest of veils. When the emptiness wears the flimsiest of veils over there, it's called Mary veil, right? And over here, whatever. But, and this is like one of the most beautiful teachings in this tradition, and I think some others have it, but this is one of the best articulations in world spirituality, you know, that this tantric, non-dual tantric Shaivism tradition gives us, that what almost everybody does is they either refuse to invest in either aspect of reality, or they overinvest in one at the expense of the other, you know? So they glimpse the emptiness and they're like, oh, okay, that negates everything, right? So life is valueless. It's just an illusion. The emptiness is what's real. And they're missing the teaching that can we close the door again? Where they're missing the teaching, and not only the teaching, the experience, the miracle of the emptiness appearing as something, and not just appearing as something in a filmy way, but in a very visceral way. That we could say the nothing wants to appear as something, you know, and so that's why, again, this tradition says God or consciousness or the self, whichever term you're using, is always simultaneously transcending all things and embodied as all things. And that this is rare among spiritual traditions in the world, of wanting to give an equal value, an equal emphasis to both aspects. Of course, it's one, right? But it's one with these two aspects, whether they're called Shiva and Shakti, whether they're called Kali and Para, whether they're called, you can name these aspects differently, but it's fundamentally about the fact that consciousness or God or the self or beingness is simultaneously always radically transcending everything in the contents of consciousness, but also embodying itself as those very contents, and that neither has a priority, right? And so that's actually quite difficult for the mind, because the mind wants to go, oh, the transcendent aspect, that must be the ultimate, right? We're saying, no, they're both the ultimate. The transcendent and the immanent, equally valuable, equally deserving our attention, right? So the reason, though, that many teachers in this arena, including me, seem to focus on the transcendent sometimes is precisely because very few people are experiencing that, right? And there's an interesting complementarity. There's a complementarity here, and this is super important to contemplate and to hopefully experience. The complementarity is, again, I was talking about how humans, they manage to not invest in either, right? They're afraid of the void, and they're afraid to be fully embodied at the same time. But that actually makes sense, because there's a real complementarity. If you get to know the void, if you get to experience the radical no-thingness, whatever we're calling that, you and see, you can't, it's not like you can see it, it's like none of the verbs work, but anyway, you experience the infinite, transcendent, unparticularized, radiant nothingness sufficiently, then you feel, in a way, safe enough to invest in embodiment completely, right? It's very hard to describe this, but it's a very, very visceral, real phenomenon, right? That the two balance each other out, and they're not ultimately two, but they balance each other out. So we need each we need an anchor in one to be able to give ourselves to the other, an anchor and embodiment to be able to give ourselves to the void, an anchor in the void, which I realize the metaphor doesn't quite work, but to be able to give yourself to embodiment, right? Because see, the funny thing is, when I'm talking to people who've experienced what I'm talking about, it's so easy. It just lands like this. And when you haven't yet, it's so difficult to try to get it across in a way that actually orients you correctly. But one of the things we discover in meditation practice is when you go deep in meditation, beyond the mind, beyond trance states as well. Some people get beyond the mind to a trance state and they think, this is it. No, that's not it either. Beyond the trance states as well, to what we call the ground of being internally, the ground of being as you experience it as still retaining a trace of individuality. Then you realize that the source of safety, the source of feeling safe, is in this formless ground, which is quite surprising. There's nothing logically that would compel you to think that, right? So everyone who's experienced it understands that this is a kind of safety that has nothing to do with the body being safe. So then if you haven't yet experienced it, you would just say, well, what kind of safety is that? That's meaningless. No, it's profoundly meaningful. That when you not only touch into, but merge with the ground of your being, letting go of your compulsive identification with body and memories and thoughts and so on, then this experience of being safe, I just don't have a better word for it. Safe is not adequate. It's not the adequate term, but I don't have a better word. It's like okayness, you could call it okayness, but fundamental okayness and safety such that you know without a shadow of a doubt that even if this body was starving to death in the gutter, the feeling of being completely safe, completely held, if you will, by life would not be impacted in the slightest. That is an astonishing thing. That is an astonishing thing that humans and human culture in general do not even suspect as a possibility, you know? And here we have people trying to keep each other safe and making safe spaces and all that. And all that's fine. I'm not saying that's wrong. But keeping the body-mind safe, keeping people from getting offended or feeling uncomfortable, that is barking up the wrong tree, right? Because nothing will ever be safe enough until you have this deep fundamental okayness that emerges only from communion with your deepest nature, your true nature, your essence nature. And then nothing is threatening because you realize that what you are cannot be damaged, cannot be traumatized. It's impossible. And when you know that experientially, that makes all the difference, right? So what's fascinating, though, about humans is they keep trying to mimic or kind of through mimesis in some way establish on the level of the body-mind a simulation of that which can only be attained or realized or felt through this deeper experience. Do you see what I mean? that people, in many, many, many different ways, they try to instantiate in the level of body-mind that which can never be actualized on that level, and which is even if they don't realize it, they have an instinct about what's called for, but it can only come from this deeper communion, you know. So there's kind of, it's so weird because it's like if the void is void, there can't be layers or stages in it, and yet somehow there are, because there's this inner void. It's this thing about still retaining a trace of individuality, right? But the inner void is inner space, it's inner openness, it's inner quiet, sacred, silent spaciousness, right? And then that opens out to something much, 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 much vaster, the infinite spaciousness or the infinite void. We just don't have a good word for this, right? And when you experience that, it's like, if you experience it conceptually, you think it negates human life, it negates human efforts and human striving and all that. But if you experience the actual thing, well, in a way, it does negate all that, but not in the sense of like saying, oh, that's all pointless. It's in the sense of that's all beautiful, even though it will never amount to anything. It can't ever amount to anything. How could anything ever amount to anything, right? This is just flux in the field of appearance. That the nothingness appears as something and it fluxes and it plays little games with itself where it's like getting somewhere and then falls apart again, you know? And when we feel it getting somewhere, when we feel the pattern moving in a way, you know, towards something, then the mind, because it's crazy, goes, things are moving that way. So we should get to the destination that I imagine by looking along that vector. You know, things are moving in a particular direction. I look along that vector and I imagine an end point to that vector, and that's where we should get. And that's all madness. That's all imagination. because this nothing appearing as something flowing as the flux of experience is just at play, and it's going to play by appearing to move towards something, and then at some point falling apart, and then appearing to move towards something else, and then that structure dissolves, right? And the wonderful thing is, every single moment of the process is perfectly expressing that which is. Do you know what I mean? It's not like later we'll get to the perfect expression. It's in every moment that the play of divine consciousness is expressing its fullness, right? So being in communion with the great emptiness, which is then manifesting as this flux of experience, makes you perfectly okay with the fact that nothing could ever add up to anything. Perfectly okay with it. And yet also perfectly okay with the impulses that arise. We have impulses of desire, of will, of vision and ambition or whatever, and we can follow those. But and this is another teaching from the Gita, right? The benefit of following them is in the following, not in the imagined destination, right? Because through giving ourselves to the impulses that arise within this field of experience, we experience more of its fullness, as opposed to the person who has identified with the void and then denies manifest reality, holds it at arm's length. This is all meaningless, you know. I mean, yes, it is all meaningless from a conceptual point of view, but it's all profoundly meaningful in terms of its actual manifestation. So if any one of you heard all that and thought that is just a bunch of word salad, I don't blame you at all. I would have thought exactly the same thing some indeterminate number of years ago. Okay? But then something happens. You know, you have this shift or this experience that's not just an experience, something that gets revealed. And then all that stuff that I just said, I know to some of you made perfect sense, right? And some of you are somewhere there in the middle. And it's all wonderful. There's no should in any of this, right? But even though there's no should, the tradition is saying if you want the fullest possible experience of reality and the embodied conviction that you I don't know how to say it, that you are in the heart of God. You know, if you want that embodied conviction, it's about marrying these two aspects in your direct experience, you know, the all transcendent, formless, radiant no-thingness, that's the ground of being, and then the immanence consciousness expressed as the immanence, the immediacy of moment-to-moment experience. And almost everyone is likely to be leaning sort of too far one way or the other without realizing it, because that's the spiritual path. You're let me lean into this. I transcend all things. This is amazing, you know. Oh, whoops, I forgot about embodiment. Or you're leaning into embodiment so much that you lose that void, that we don't have a name for at all, and void is a terrible, terrible word, but it doesn't matter because none of the words are going to be good. That is what puts everything in perspective. It puts everything in perspective. So it's so crucial, you know. But you can't just hang out in the void. And if that was the point, there wouldn't be something. There would just be nothing. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. This is a newbie question. You spoke before to I don't know whether you called it the dangers, the pitfalls of a kind of an intellectual understanding of awakening versus the experience of awakening.
Yes.
But you have to start somewhere. So
Yes.
where's the entree for us newbies?
There are many possible entry points. Here's a little book called the Recognition Sutras. There's many possible entry points, and you need view teaching. That's philosophy. Is called view teaching in the tradition. You need that. It's just that if you overinvest in intellectual understanding of the teachings, that becomes a handicap. That becomes a because the more, like, if you become very good at understanding the teachings, then the pleasure you get from understanding them substitutes for the effect of realizing that from which the teachings arose in the first place. Okay? So that's that is a significant pitfall, but you easily can antidote it by just saying, okay, I read and I marinate in the teachings, but they are pointers. It's not enough to understand them. I'm going to experientially feel into where they're pointing. Yeah. So let's come to the main teaching for which the workshop is named before we run out of time. Okay, so in Kalakta's Spandakarika, and everything we are talking about is all crucially part of this tradition. We were just ranging over it freely. So what verse do I want to give you? So one of Kalakta's key teachings is to pay attention to the arising of each new phenomenon, each new energy state, each new mood, each new thought, that if you kind of are attentive enough and you're noticing thoughts arise, or you're noticing feelings arise, you're noticing moods arise, and then he says, look to where they're arising from. Now, of course, you discover that you can't, right? You can't actually see where they're arising from, but you can feel closer and closer and closer and closer to the source, and then there can be this kind of intuitive, spontaneous leap where you realize that you are the source, just not the you that you thought you were, the you that you actually are. Okay? So basically, the practice is simple. You're just attending to arising of an energy state, a mood, a feeling, a thought. And then you're trying to discern from where is it arising, which is also the same question as where does it merge when it merges again, you know? And you're following it as closely as possible when it merges, and you're feeling into that from which it is arising. And again, you're never going to be able to make this an object of experience. You're never going to be able to see, hear, taste, smell, touch, feel, or comprehend it, right? But as you get very, very close, there can be this intuitive click where you realize the ground of being from which everything is arising, even though you can't make it an object of experience. And of course you can't, because you can't see that which makes all seeing possible, right? Alan Watts famously loved to talk about this. I can't even count how many times that man said, you can't see your own eyeballs. You can't bite your own teeth. You can't, and he's just saying, you can't make the source of perception into an object of perception. It's impossible. And there's this beautiful teaching in the Krama lineage of non-dual Tantric Shaivism that says what we call the goddess is precisely that, the point within consciousness that it is impossible to objectify, right? That is the goddess. That is the is in fact the source of everything. And when you realize yourself as that, that becomes perfectly obvious. You just never realized it before because it could never become an object of perception. Right? It has to be realized experientially. Okay, so that's the teaching on unmesha, right? To pay attention to the arising and see ask yourself, where is it arising from? And you keep looking or feeling into where is it arising from, hoping for that spontaneous intuitive shift. Okay, skipping to Kalakta explains, the unliberated one, that is to say, a normal human being, the unliberated one is besieged and obscured by the psyche, which resides in the mind, the ego, and the faculty of judgment, and takes the form of mental imagery and memories. Such a one, besieged and obscured by the psyche, helplessly undergoes the kind of experience that is produced by cognitions and concepts arising from the psyche. In other words, such a one, most people, are trapped in a mind world, a mind-determined world, and they don't know how to not be trapped. He says they are helplessly undergoing the kind of experience that is produced by thoughts and concepts arising from the psyche, due to which she or he wanders in the cycle of suffering. And then he says in the final verse of Spandakarika, but when she or he is firmly rooted in the one, the source, then she or he becomes capable of bringing about at will the arising and dissolving of that experience produced by cognitions and concepts. In other words, when you become firmly rooted in the one, you become capable of seeing the world with and through the lens of the mind, with the mind and through its lens, and dissolving it also. It's an option. You can see the world with mind, or you don't need those mental filters, right? Or sometimes you do, and there they are. Or you can lay them aside. Now, for people who have never experienced perception without mental filter, it sounds unbelievable. Academic philosophers are always saying, no, this is not possible to perceive without mental filters. But when it happens to you, you're like, holy shit, it's possible, right? And it's astonishing. And it's just that it's impossible to describe. It's so impossible to describe perception without mental filters, right? But when you're perceiving without mental filters, you don't know what anything is. Like you literally don't know what anything is. And when you don't know what anything is, you become so open. It's like instinctive within our evolutionary biology, right? You don't know what something is, you pay attention and you experience it in all its vividness. And so this experience of unknowing, right? Freedom from the mental filter is the same as unknowing, but it's an experiential knowing because you don't know what anything is, and therefore you're radically open, and everything presents in its full glory, as it were, right? Everything's more vivid, everything's more alive. And many of you have had a little taste of this, right? You've had the mystical experience where it's like, all the colors in the world are more vivid and everything is sparkling. I'm sure the majority of you have had that, okay? Then that's great. That's a wonderful experience. But that's just a little glimpse. That's just a little taste of it. Because when you go further into actually dropping the mental filters and not knowing what anything is, it's so jaw-droppingly astonishing, right? And makes you realize, oh shit, I don't know what anything is any of the time. It just seems like I do because I'm seeing through a mental filter, which says, person, this kind of person, that kind of person, tree, and you're experiencing the whole world as your concept of it, not directly. Okay. So this is what he's talking about. This is how Kalata is in fact characterizing the whole goal of the path. Because this is the final verse of Spandakarika, and he's saying that the one who becomes liberated is the one, we define liberation as this ability to see with or without mental filters at will. Okay. And he says, when you have that ability, you realize the state of being the universal experiencer, that you are the one consciousness that is experiencing all things from all vantage points. Okay. And you consequently become sovereign of the circle. The circle means the mandala of your existence, the mandala of existence, right? But from each vantage point, there's a finite mandala of existence, even though the combined finite mandalas add up to infinite. Okay. How does that work? I don't know, but it does. Right? Because, okay, so let me explain. Let me try to explain this. The goal of the spiritual path, then, is summed up with the word chakreshwar, which means sovereign of the wheel. So that is the state in which you see that what you are pervades and indeed is the source and motive power of all the arising and subsiding that's happening in experience, all the phenomena arising and subsiding in experience, right? It's not happening randomly. It's not happening it's not something being done to you. It's what you are expressing in that way by virtue of the powers and potencies inherent to consciousness. Meaning to say that your whole life is not some accident that's happening to you in some random fashion. That consciousness adopts a unique vantage point that we can call, insert your name here. Consciousness adopts a unique vantage point so that it can see the world of experience that constitutes its body from a unique angle. It wants to experience itself, as it were, from every possible angle. And it does, right? So the realization that's possible here is that, one way of putting it in the metaphor is that you occupy the hub, the center of the unbroken wheel of experience, rather than being, a tiny something that's on the periphery of that rim, right? So Kalata gave us a sequence there. He said, when you have the capacity to summon and dismiss the mental filters at will, when you have the capacity to experience reality in this unfiltered way at will, then you can truly realize, not conceptually but experientially, that what you are is the sovereign of the circle, the chakreshwara. What does that mean? Well, let's just put it in the simplest possible experiential terms. It means that you always have access to the still point at the center of the turning world. And that still point is in you and is you. But you are also the powers and potencies of consciousness which turn that wheel. And the whole point here is that this is radical because you thought you were just, a little person in a big universe here almost by accident, right? And even if you don't think that, you're afraid it's true. Deep down, you're afraid that's true. Because that's what our culture pushes, right? There's the programming our culture pushes. And then you discovered, oh, wow, miracle of miracles. Just as you knew to be the case at 2 or 3 years old, you are the center of the universe. The only difference is that the 2 or 3-year-old cannot comprehend, or the 1-year-old cannot comprehend that everybody is the center of the universe from their own perspective, and that perspective is valid and correct. Every point is the center, right? So the little child knows that they're the center of the universe. It's obvious. And that's why they're so confused when you tell them they're not. Just try it with any 3-year-old. You're not the center of the universe, and they'll just be like, what? What the hell are you saying? It makes no sense because they are literally in the middle of everything all the time from their own perspective, and so are you. You just get habituated into this adult perspective that you're going here and there. You've never gone anywhere. Okay, so this is like, oh shoot, maybe I could write a New York Times bestseller, because Eckhart Tolle did The Power of Now, and we also need the power of here. Because the teaching is you have never gone anywhere. You couldn't. Where would you go? When you think you're going somewhere, that's just consciousness transforming its contents. It's just consciousness transforming, which is all it ever does. Okay? So it's fascinating. It sounds totally silly, but you might have a real shift if you just do this. You're going for a walk, you're walking along, and you put your finger or thumb on your sternum, and you look down and you're walking, and you notice, oh, this point is still. And then you look up, it's, oh, the world is moving past my still point. It's never gone anywhere. And that's not just a mental trick. That is true perception. And it's true in physics too, relativity of motion, right? There's no reason to prefer one frame over the other, but we constantly are preferring the frame that the world is a static thing that I am moving through, when there's no reason to think that way, especially when it's not true from your direct perception, your direct experience. Okay? So what's the practice here? There's many practices that intersect with this teaching, right? But the fundamental practice is to feel into, as we were already doing at the beginning, feel into the still point that exists within yourself. Ground down in that still point. That still point can become a formless ground. Relax, melt into the formless ground. And then your perception can shift in this remarkable and beautiful way that there's nowhere, you've not only never gone anywhere, there's nowhere that you could go. So you get to just relax in the middle of everything while the play of consciousness unfolds. There's never been anything else to do. Now, of course, saying it in words is easy. and understanding it and pretending like you understand it, that's easy compared to this actual shift. But the shift is very much possible because it's innate within all of us. Well, when I feel like I've failed to convey the teaching, I just remind myself that I'm always going to fail. There is no way to do it with words. There's no way. But maybe a door gets opened, maybe a possibility gets unveiled, and maybe you decide to investigate it more deeply. That's all. That's all that we could ask for from this workshop, or indeed any workshop. That you might feel called to investigate this more deeply and look into your direct experience and find what there is to be discovered when you set aside all the assumptions and just go deeper into your direct experience of what is. Okay, So let's go back to questions or comments. Yeah.
I'm Sarah,
Hi.
and my question is something that's been a big theme in my practice in the last few years is kind of practicing being more intimate with pain, like physical pain, emotional pain, all kinds of things. But but I find that this mental chatter or like mental filter that happens like when there's pain, and then there's the mental filter of like, this is bad, this shouldn't be happening, I don't like this. That it's kind of one of the most murky, at least for me, it's a very murky place to be. And yeah, and so I know this is a huge question, so just kind of whatever comes to you from this, but if you have any suggestions for being with pain and being intimate with that experience.
Oh, absolutely. The teaching there is to get so intimate with it that it's not even pain anymore. When you're labeling it pain, you're already at a distance from it, you know. But there's a whole practice around getting more intimate with the body, the direct experience of body. So it's not like you're just zeroing in on the pain. You're getting more intimate with the whole experience of body and lovingly including the pain, what you have previously called pain, and noticing, oh, I don't have to call it pain. I could just call it intensity, right? And it's a sort of intensity that the mind instinctively pushes away. But you observe, oh, this pushing away kind of movement that's happening from the mind doesn't actually help anything. Yeah. Yeah. So what if I soften around it? The pain, the emotional pain or physical pain, what if I just soften around it and get closer to it, bring it in close and allow it to be, but ask myself, what is the nature of this experience without my story about it? And keep asking that, and then something else reveals itself. And then as soon as the mind starts to recognize what's getting revealed, it has a story about it. And so then you again ask, but what is the nature of this experience without my story about it, apart from my story about it? That's a very, very empowering practice. Yeah. That's the short answer. Yeah. A million hands. Just, pick any. Yeah, there.
Hi. Thank you so much. You're doing such a good job.
Oh, thank you.
So a lot of teachings focus on realizing, having the realization or stabilizing awakening. I'm wondering what the meditative path looks like after stabilizing awakening.
Well, there's not just one awakening, right? There can be multiple phases or stages or flavors of awakening, right? So if you've stabilized one, maybe there's a draw onward to something more. So this tradition organizes them in a very simplistic way as the awakening pertaining to the soul, the awakening pertaining to Shakti, and the awakening pertaining to Shiva. But it's just a way of describing three different possible flavors of awakening, right? And sometimes they it's not a hierarchy, but it has to, in some ways, has to be progressive. Because, for example, the third stage, if we call it a stage, the third stage of awakening kind of, in a way, wipes out the first one, right? It's like you awaken to your essence, your soul, and then in the third stage, you discover you don't have a soul. But that first awakening was perfectly true and perfectly legitimate, right? It just gets subsumed within a deeper, larger context later on. So you might feel this draw on to further stage of awakening, or you might not feel the draw. It doesn't matter. You can't help it. You feel the draw or you don't. If you feel it, you can't help but act on it, right? Because this draw is the most powerful force that exists. But in terms of when awakening completes itself, right, which we can describe as, okay, you've gone through the 3 stages of awakening, and then it's as if you come back to where you started, and you're just a normal human, except without any beliefs governing you. You know, you're just a normal human without believing I'm just a human, which is kind of a hard thing to describe, right? But 3 phases and then back to where you started, and everything is incredibly ordinary, and the whole awakening journey was like just a dream. And yet it's also not the same of where you started from at all, right? Because belief in thoughts doesn't dictate or govern experience. And I mean, I know people who've gone through this journey so long ago now that they can't really remember. I sometimes, remind them, like, there's one friend of mine, all 3 phases, back to where it started, even though it's not where it started, but it is also just extremely ordinary, very ordinary. It's like the 10th of the ox herding pictures and the 10 ox herding pictures. That's a different system. 10 stages. This is the same thing in 4 stages. Okay, 3 plus 1. And so this friend of mine, it's like, oh, it's just that whole awakening thing was just a dream. That was just a very interesting dream I had. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not, your moment to moment and day-to-day experience is not governed by believing in thoughts. And he's like, oh no. As if, who would do that? Who would be so crazy? Yeah. But it's yeah. What's the role of meditation? It depends. You could reach a point where there's no role. Like somebody asked, Mike Snyder, like, he went through all 3 shifts and came back to ordinary. And somebody asked him, do you still meditate? He's like, I don't need to, because when I walk, I'm walking without walking. And when I talk, I'm talking without talking. Right? So there's no everything is meditative when there's no separate self who needs to do. Doing is exhausting. When there's no doing happening, it's not exhausting. So everything's meditative. That's one answer. Yeah.
You've given us some signposts towards what might be called awareness practices, or just levels of awareness. And I see those as potential practices that may be informal, that may be done throughout the day, like walking and finding your center point. You'd also mentioned in the ancient times, people studied for, let's say, 90 minutes a day, or they did practices for 90 minutes a day. So let's say, just as a practical question, if I have 90 minutes a day to devote to this practice, as a daily practice, where might you guide me to start with that? Like, I know in the recognition sutras, you have the awareness meditation, the eyes open meditation, and I found that one pretty potent. So I'm wondering if I'm someone who likes structure, and maybe I'm holding on tightly to that, but the 90-minute practice a day, like, what might you guide for that?
Yeah, no, structure can be very good. Structure can be great. Well, on the learning portal tantrailluminated.org, we have lots and lots and lots of guided meditations. And many people, including perhaps yourself, would like a systematic plan. You know, you do this meditation, then you complete level 1, and then you do this meditation, you know. But actually, for the most part, it just doesn't matter. The important thing is receiving the cues and doing the practices, not which order you do them in. Sometimes it can matter a little bit, but for the most part, it doesn't. Because a lot of people have the misunderstanding that if I just do the practices right, in the right order, then that will produce the result. And as one of my teachers says, no, practices cannot cause awakening any more than a path to a mountain could produce a mountain. So practices are the purpose of practice is to fertilize the soil. So if awakening is a sprout, right, you need to fertilize the soil, water the soil. That's what the practice is. It doesn't directly cause, but it makes it more possible. It helps. It helps enable it. And the point is, the fact is that whenever you're ready to shift, you're going to shift. You know, and it doesn't. You know, you could play any practice that day that you're finally ready, but it doesn't matter because it's just this ripeness needs barely a cue, and it happens. And then the mind of the person might even misunderstand and say, oh, that practice, that one did it. But they had to ripen for God knows how long before they reach a point that any practice is gonna do it, you know. And of course, there's a problem with making this awakening thing into an attainment. It is absolutely true that on some deeper level you are already awake, but you don't recognize your own awakeness. So then we just call it recognition, right? But we still have the same issue. Whatever we call it, it can easily get fetishized into an attainment, right? But what we need to do is instead of thinking of it as something I reach an attainment, right? It's learning how to relax so thoroughly that you relax out of identity. So the relaxing, of course, being able to relax the physical body is important, but it's psychic relaxing that we're talking about. Being able to relax in the level of the psyche so thoroughly that you slip right out of identity. Theoretically, anyone can do it any moment, you see. You don't realize it, but almost all of you, and I can literally see it in your faces. It's obvious. Almost all of you have been sitting here the whole time maintaining a self-image. Like, I'm a person in a class listening to a teacher. You know, I'm a person on a journey, and I'm hoping this talk will help me on my journey or whatever. You don't have to think any of that. It's all there, you know. But it's taking energy to maintain this sense of persona. You just don't realize it because you're so used to it, right? But it's nothing but a thought. That's the weird part. It's nothing but a thought. You're not actually a person. A person is a thought. It's a concept. There's no such thing as persons in reality, except in the mental reality. In the mind there are, right? So any moment, any of you right now could just subtract the mental overlay. It's not so hard if you're ready to do it, but it might only happen for a moment. Right? There's just a field of experience. There's just consciousness arising in this way. There's no teacher, there's no student, there's no person, there's no man, there's no woman, there's no non-binary person either. It's all concept. It's all concept. There's just the substance of experience, which is always perfectly indefinable, incomprehensible. And then the mental overlay. Right? The interesting thing is that the mind would never in a million years suspect what freedom is unlocked by this simple realization. If you're not a person, well, there's nobody you have to be. You don't have to live up to your self-image because that was all just fantasy. You don't have to live up to anyone else's self-image, image of you, I mean, right? If you're not a person, you don't have to try to be a good person. You don't have to be worried about that you're a bad person. And people get all then concerned about that. Oh, but won't I then do immoral things? No, because that's not your nature. I mean, it is the nature for a small percentage of the population, right? That we call psychopaths or whatever. But they're gonna be psychopaths no matter what. It doesn't matter about spiritual awakening, right? Like people worry, oh, if this awakening is like, oh, I don't have to be, I'm not a person, so I don't have to try to be a good person. You can just be natural, and you discover that your nature is benevolent for almost all of you. I mean, for all of us on a deep enough level. If we go deep enough into our nature, there is pure benevolence on that level. But even on the ordinary human level, almost everyone is instinctively benevolent, given half the chance. But they don't give themselves half the chance because they're terrified most of the time. Thanks for coming. Okay. Well, we can talk and talk. And the thing is, again, if the workshop confirmed some things you suspected and made you feel good about your own realizations, then it has failed. Because the workshop is only a success from the point of view of the spiritual path, from the point of view of awakening. The workshop is only a success if it has made you feel. If it has made you feel there is something here that I'm not getting, not on the mental level, on the experiential level. There's something about the nature of reality that this guy is talking about that if it's true, I have to find it out. That's when the workshop is successful. That you don't have to make yourself sit for practice meditation. You are drawn like a magnet, like a moth to the flame, to that cushion, or wherever you meditate. It can be a park bench. It doesn't matter, because you have to find out. What if it's true? Maybe he was full of shit, that guy, and whoever else I heard. Maybe, but what if it's true that there's something incredibly much deeper to the nature of reality than hinted at anywhere in our culture or in our mainstream discourse? Then you get curious, then you get interested, then you get motivated, and it's just about going deeper into your own experience. That's it. Not into your conceptualization of your experience, your actual experience. So let's close with a little singing, a little mantra. What's an easy one? I have no idea what I'm going to play. But this is normal. I have no idea what I'm going to say, even though we put a title on the workshop, and I try to eventually get there. But that's nice, but I want something a little bit more upbeat. Okay, that's good. was going to invite Karnamrita up here, but I guess she just went. She'll be back. Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambho, Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambho, Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambho, Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambho. Okay, that's good, but I want to go even more upbeat. Jaya Shiva Shankara Bom Bom Hara Hara, 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 Hara Hara, Hara Hara 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 Bom Bom Hara Hara, Jaya Shiva Shankara 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 Bom Bom Hara Hara, Hara Hara, Hara Hara 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 Bom Bom Hara Hara, Jaya Shiva Shankara 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 Bom Bom Hara Hara, Hara Hara, Hara Hara 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 Bom Bom Hara Hara, Jaya Shiva Shankara 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 Bom Bom Hara Hara, Hara Hara, Hara Hara 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 Bom Bom Hara Hara, Jaya Shiva Shankara 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 Bom Bom Hara Hara, Hara Hara, Hara Hara Bom Bom Hara Hara, Hara Hara, Hara Hara Bom Bom Hara Hara, Hara hara hara, hara hara, boom boom, hara hara, hara hara, hara hara, boom boom, hara hara, Jaya Shiva Shankara, 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 boom boom, hara hara, hara hara, hara hara, 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 boom boom, hara hara, Jaya Shiva Shankara, 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 boom boom, hara hara.
We always close our kata or our meditations with a final mantra, which is known as a kavach, or a protection of our minds and our bodies as we leave this discussion. Namaste Narasimhaya Pralada Hiranyakashipur Bhakshaha Shilatankanakalaye Ito Nashingho Parato Nashingho Yato Yamitato Nashingho Bahye Nashingho Hridaye Nashingho Narashinghamadim Sharanam Prapadye Tavakara Kamalavare Nakam Adbhuta Shingam Talita Hiranyakashipu Tanu Bringam Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare, Jai Jagadisha Hare, Jai Jagadisha Hare. Narasimha Bhagavan ki jai, Prahlad Maharaj ki jai.
We pay homage to all our teachers, past masters, as well as teachers of this life, with Sadgurunath Maharaj ki jai. So we'll do it again, and this time you all come in on the J. Sadgurunath Maharaj ki jai. Much better. Thank you. So, just a little warning, because if the seeds planted today do actually start taking root and sprouting, your life might get very weird very soon. And just know that the spiritual awakening process is almost nothing like what it's been sold as. The most salient feature of a genuine awakening is disorientation, destabilization. What the fuck is going on? And are they going to put me away? These are the signs of a real awakening. So just know it's totally normal. It's just that there's a little bit of disorientation attendant upon discovering that the person you thought you were is nothing but a scripted character in a staged drama. But the real you is, luckily, the producer of that drama. So everything turns out okay, even though it can get funky in the middle bit. So if you want to join our community where there's lots of support for this process and people at all sorts of stages, and then please feel free to do so. So tantrailluminated.org, and the architect and mastermind of that learning portal, that educational platform, is my business partner, Stuart Williams, who's there in the corner. So together we've made a community that holds several thousand people at this point, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So lots of support in terms of practices, in terms of community, in terms of satsangs, right? But if you don't want to do that for whatever reason, I also have lots of resources available for free online, like on YouTube. Like you were asking about, you can, in your practice session every day, learn a new practice and then do the new practice, right? And I have 100 videos on YouTube teaching practices, literally 100. And you can learn all those practices and then go back to the ones that seemed most interesting, most resonant, most grabbed you, right? So even though we have a platform, a membership site that we would like you to join and gives you access to all this community, it's not the case that the teachings or practices are only for people who buy a membership, right? We also have tons and tons of stuff for free in various places, including YouTube. So please go ahead and investigate and see what happens. And thank you for being here. Good night, sweet dreams. We love you. See you soon. And thank you, Karnamrita.
Yes, thank you.
How long are you here?
A few weeks.
So were you here for a while already during the holidays? Whatever you were doing, you succeeded in getting over into my right brain, where I was just presence.
Good.
But I would go through it because you remind me myself when I start chattering, and then you don't connect it, and then you feel the disconnect. Yeah. But I get what you were saying. Right. You got me into being just present coming through.
Good.
Without having any identity.
No identity needed?
No, there isn't.
And not even trying to understand?
No, that's the whole point. Understanding the soul. That's what you meant. I like when you said dwelling, it's like you said soul first. Just came over here. No mind, having to go on. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of other people.
Yeah. I have a few of us standing here. What's your name? My name is Eric. Nice to meet you.
I was curious about how to go from childhood
No, this is my very first time. I